Yeah, good. All right. Hey, everybody, how's it going? This is our Thursday WebDM live stream. I'm Jim Davis, and with Timora is with us. We will have no technical difficulties today, but we'll see. You know how it goes. Hope you guys are doing good this Thursday, having a nice December. Got some snow, getting in the holiday spirit, and all that good stuff. Um, Today, we're going to move on with our kind of reassessment and revisiting of the fifth edition Dungeons and Dragons classes. Up on the chopping block is the monk. Um, not really interested too much in going back through the rest of the UA playtest packet from a few weeks ago, mostly because I don't know, the rules glossary stuff is less interesting to me than talking about like what the classes mean, how do they work, what do we hope to see from the ones that that haven't made it into an Unearthed Arcana yet. So that's where we're at. It's my stream. I'm going to do whatever I want with it. So yeah, there you go. And if you want to support the channel, help us out here with what we do, you can head on over to our Patreon over at WebDM and check us out. We're coming up on 270 some odd podcast episodes, and I just recorded a Q&A by myself, solamente, answering some of y'all's questions from the recent YouTube live streams. So if you'd like to check out more of those or something like that, then head on over there and get yourself some audio goodness for the upcoming dark days of winter. So yeah, I can. We've already got some good questions already. I can see that we're going to get into the weeds on like technical jargon and the like, and I think that's kind of appropriate for the monk, given how complex they are as a class. So if you'd like for us to get to your questions, just be sure to put question in big bold words in front of your actual question so that we can see it, pull it out of the chat. And if we don't get to it today, then who knows? Maybe there will be another Q&A roundup over on the Patreon that you can check out. All right, I want to warm up myself because it is a chilly day with a couple of the questions that we've got before going through the monk class features and kind of seeing where we're at. And so Andrew, I'm going to do Andrew's question here first. Andrew asks, do you feel that monks' abilities can be shut down by an anti-magic field, such as a beholder's eye or a spell? Or are they physical and quote-unquote count as magic to overcome the resistance to non-magical attacks? That's a very interesting question because the the player's handbook would say yes, both. It describes ki, which fuels a great many of the monk's class features. It does a lot of a lot of narrative heavy lifting. It's described as a magical energy that flows through all living bodies. The monks are able to harness that power. I'm kind of curious what that means for sorcerers in at least the fluff of D&D. And yeah, it's magic. It's magical. It's they're able to produce magical effects. The things that the various monk subclasses can get up to when they spin their ki are certainly magical, up to and including casting spells. And so it really is like a question of, okay, well, if this is magical, then yeah, can it be dispelled? If we're using ki to stun someone, can an enemy spellcaster dispel the stunned condition on that particular creature that the monk has just used their magical energy force to manipulate the other creature's magical energy force? And honestly, I find that this is one of those things that that D&D drops this bombshell and then just leaves it there for the individual groups and the like to figure out. And I find these kind of frustrating because this could be like a potentially, like you could build an entire world around this idea of there being a magical force that flows through living beings and that the monk manipulates it, and then the spellcasters are manipulating it in a different way. And you can do all kinds of fun stuff with it. But like, the D&D world being made of 4 elements in various admixture, it's an idea that Dungeons and Dragons draws from the real world. It's taking inspiration from real world beliefs, real world practices, and sort of making them fantastic and presenting them in this archetype. Now, to actually answer your question, I wouldn't do this to a monk because that would just, in the principle of enjoyable gameplay is why I wouldn't do it. Even though it's edge cases, how often does anti-magic come up? To me, I in my games, rarely, very rarely, because anti-magic is anti-fun. it's just for everybody involved. I find it creates a whole bunch of headaches from the GM side of thing, dissatisfying from a player side. I prefer something else, something that's less stark than anti-magic, and reserve anti-magic for things like this is an area of the world that is like scarred. There was a cataclysm here, something like that, that magic is dead. There is none. So yeah, I think, Andrew, you could justify, yeah, it's magical. Anti-magic is anti-magic. But for my purposes, I prefer to use the 3rd edition classification of various creature and player character abilities, even though 5th edition doesn't go into this much detail. And that's essentially that some abilities are extraordinary. They are things that are not possible to do in the real world, or that are with only like a lifetime of training and the most, perfect circumstances. Could you do this? Then there's supernatural abilities. Those abilities which are clearly magical, but are not necessarily fueled by magic that could, be counteracted with a dispel magic or anti-magic, something like that. And then there are spell-like abilities, which may be just spells that you can cast naturally, innately, or it might be effects that might as well be a spell, and so therefore are, subject to things like counterspell, dispel, anti-magic. I don't have a hard and fast rule. I haven't gone through the the player's handbook or monster manual to codify these, but it's just something I keep in mind when I'm thinking about, okay, what should and shouldn't count as magical. I think I like this question because Dungeons and Dragons, I think, struggles with portraying mundane warriors in a way that is satisfying for the players at the table who look at the casters in the party, those who are capable of full spell casting and have the neat little buttons and things they can do, and a mindset develops of I can't do that. I'm not as good at playing the game. Like, my character's just not as good at interacting with the game world as these casters. I find that fundamentally at odds with the act of role playing itself, which is just think of something and ask the DM, attempt it. But also, there's a missed opportunity that I think the monks really is trying to fill, of the magical martial artist. The fact that D&D has more than just spells as its magic, and that getting really good at something, really good at it, mastering it, especially when there's a supernatural component to it, is a type of magic in and of itself. And I think that D&D has sort of experimented a bit with that with Book of Nine Swords in late 3.5. Certainly a lot of the various options in 4th edition were overtly magical, and 5th edition too. A lot of the giant abilities that we've seen in UAs before 1D&D came out certainly seem to suggest that we're going in a direction of having magical attacks and magical powers be available to non-spellcasters through a variety of means, subclass options, feats, that kind of thing. This is great. To me, this is something that D&D, it's a natural fit. I think it works well, and you can still have a kind of classic mundane fighter type that still has abilities that would be considered magical by virtue of their dedication, skill, grit, all of those things. And I think Monk is touching on that in one way and fulfills a lot of those concepts. But there's still something left for the fighter types, the barbarians, the paladins, things like that. And so, yeah, I think that that's where I'll begin, because one thing that sticks out to me with the monk as we're looking at the flavor, and to me, the flavor text at the beginning of the class descriptions is just as important as the actual language of the features themselves, sets the tone, expectations, and the like. But monks are over here living an aesthetic life that, is dedicated towards personal perfection and the like. And we're drawing on real world religious practice. People become monks because they want to, focus on some sort of spiritual devotion, something outside themselves, secluding themselves off from the rest of the world to focus on this one thing. And sometimes as a byproduct, it comes with this sort of personal development and inner development. Maybe one of the motivations for becoming a monk is personal enlightenment or the like. But there's usually a greater calling, something greater than that that's present. I find that missing from the D&D monk. And this is a theme of mine, I think, because I could say the same with things like Bard or Druid, where D&D is taking real world inspiration, whether we're talking, medieval Christian monks or, various monastic traditions of the Indian religions or, Buddhist traditions like that. Like, we're clearly going with like a Shaolin monk with the classic inspiration here. But the reasons why someone would do it, what they're doing secluded in a monastery in the first place, I think is what's missing. And, D&D doesn't like touching religion, despite having all kinds of inspirations from real world religions in it. It doesn't want to be prescriptive and the like. But to me, it's a missed opportunity. And I think that in our own worlds, as we're playing, thinking about the monk is like, well, they're kind of a priestly class too. It is going to be fruitful because it makes for more diverse characters, more interesting characters, and drawing inspiration from the real world, letting it inspire us, so that we learn from whatever culture it is that we're drawing from. We're taking it and using it to fuel our imaginations. I think is one of the best things about D&D when it's done well. So yeah, there's all kinds of weird stuff going on with the monk. There's ki. Everybody's got it. They've got the force, prana, vril, orgon, whatever you want to call it. There's a vital force that flows through everything in the D&D universe, and the monks are the only ones that really deal with it. They're the ones that manipulate it and the like. And so they call this ki, which is, how I pronounce it. I have no idea, whether or not that's corresponds to actual real world pronunciations of the like, just sort of what it looks like to me. And so I guess, Tyler, that answers your question there. I don't know that there is a definitive pronunciation of it, given the context that we're working with here. Excuse me. So yeah, monks, a lot going on. They seclude themselves from the wider world in order to seek some sort of inner perfection. This is, to me, where the missing religious element is in the monk description, but I also don't think it's necessary. The fact that monk is the name of the class is sort of incidental. Could call it martial artist. It will work just fine. But to get to the nuts and bolts of the class itself, I'd like to give a bit of disclaimer. I have not been kind to monks over the various campaigns that I've run in different editions of D&D. My opinions of them in 3rd edition were quite low, despite Pruitt being an avid fan of monks and wanting to play every other character as one. I found them to be, sort of like, why would you play this class? They don't hit hard. They're, paper thin, hit points. Whatever it is that I want the monk to do, it doesn't seem to be able to do. So I find the 5th edition monk is a fulfillment of an idea that in 2nd edition and 3rd edition, I found just would fall down flat all the time, that there'd have to be special concessions, or we have to have certain magic items that we make sure you get, monk player, so that you can keep up with the barbarians and fighters and the like in the party. 5th edition, I don't find that to be the case. And so in that sense, I really like the position that the monk is in 5th edition. I think that they've got a lot going for them. There's still weird and odd stuff going on. As a multi-attribute dependency class, a mad class, it's hard to invest in secondary or tertiary abilities. For instance, you want to take advantage of the fact that you can eventually talk to anything by having a good charisma and charisma skills. You're going to be dealing with some scant resources there. But if you want to just hit stuff, move around the battlefield and the like, I really think monk is a solid class for you. It's good at melee, good striker, depending on what subclass you pick for it. They can be a tank, backup, melee tank for whoever else you have in the party. They can be party support with healing. They can tag along with the rogue to scout. So they're very versatile in that sense. And I think they fulfill a role in the game, both conceptually and mechanically. And I think it's executed fairly well. However, not without their flaws. D8 hit die for a melee combatant is rough. Man, that is rough. You really feel for the monk player. In my opinion, monks are a D12 hit die class. Come on, we're going to talk about physical perfection and all that, and they don't have the best hit die in the game. I don't think so. I think there are two classes that justify D12 hit die: barbarian and monk. And depending on what day it is, maybe sorcerer. But definitely I would put the monk's hit die at D12 because if you really want to take advantage of unarmored defense, you're having to sink all of your ability score increases, or the majority of them, into dexterity and wisdom. We ought to have the hit points to back it up. I really do think so. Everything else can be fine. No armor, simple weapons, just fairly meager skill list. At least they get an artisan's tool or a musical instrument. That it would make all of that go down easier if we were to bump up that hit die. So yeah, first level monks, unarmored defense, core of what the monk does. To me, I don't see why shields are excluded personally. To me, a shield is a weapon. It is something that you would use. It's a simple weapon. It's, dead easy for a bunch of monks somewhere in Faerun, up in a mountain somewhere, to create some wicker and hide shields to help them, defend their monastery against whatever threat that comes its way. I understand all the other kinds of armor not being available to the monk, but the shield is one of those where I usually make a concession for it. Also so that various players can pretend to be Captain America or something like that when they're playing their monks. I find it's very satisfying for players. But unarmored defense is there mostly for aesthetic purposes. It's there to reinforce the idea of someone that fights without armor. They're ready to go at a moment's notice. They are themselves the weapon and are dangerous without needing anything else. And I think it works. As an aside, I also don't mind mad classes. I kind of think every class should be mad and have at least, need at least 2 ability scores, if not a third, in order to create variety and the like. So that's just me. Martial arts is the next big one. And it's like the central feature for the monk. For the most part, it's like a feat, a fighting style, and the like, all rolled into one. Damage starts out kind of low at D4 for your unarmed strike, so you're probably better off using a quarterstaff or a spear or some other weapon until it gets up to a D8. But, D4 is nothing to sneeze at. I think that the differences between the various damage dice are sometimes overblown. And the monk certainly makes up for it in volume of attacks. They are able to match the fighter eventually in the number of attacks they get. And depending on what subclass it is, even more. And then what you get is essentially 2-weapon fighting. Anytime you attack, you can make this bonus action attack. And I think this is important to remember because Flurry of Blows is coming up at 2nd level, but you can always get this 1 extra bonus attack without having to spend your key resource. No pun intended. And so I think it's a solid feature that really anchors the monk and solidifies it as this unarmored combatant. The idea that they can punch a dragon and the dragon can go down is cool. That is what D&D is about. Hold my jacket. I'm going to go wrestle this giant. That's an image that I want invoked, that I never get tired of thinking about, and that I certainly don't think players get tired of it either. So, key is at 2nd level, and we're really feeling the other sort of central pillar of the monk here: Flurry of Blows, Patient Defense, and Step of the Wind. For me, what really stands out by now is that the bonus action for a monk is spoken for. And you have all kinds of ways to spend this resource that you have that's renewable, that eventually you get quite a lot of, and it refreshes fairly regularly. I find the fact that the key is a short rest, refreshing resource that you get a number of points equal to your level very satisfying. Starts out a little low. Got to make some choices about which of your abilities that you're going to use. But the more you level up, the more of it that you get, and it's easy to get back. And I really hope that this doesn't change. This is really one of those things about One D&D that's gotten under my skin, is the ubiquity of the proficiency bonus per long rest uses. And in my opinion, I think every class ought to have a mix of short and long rest refreshing abilities. And I know that's kind of the case now, but to me, the mix isn't balanced enough. There's still some classes that are too far either way. But for the monk, it's like, you just can keep going. As long as you get a little rest, as long as you're able to meditate, then you will have the resources you need to be a monk. And even if you blow through them all in 1 or 2 fights, it's not like you're done for the day. Now, in terms of the options here, Flurry of Blows is sort of the classic one. You get a lot of attacks, or rather 2 extra attacks for your bonus action. Patient Defense, dodge, bonus action dodge is quite, to be quite powerful. And it's one of the things that I think makes monks sort of viable as a melee combatant, despite their low hit die and the like, is that when they need to, they can be really hard to hit. And then depending on what subclass you pick, will only increase that survivability. Then Step of the Wind is a bit like cunning action for the rogue. You get a dash or a disengage, the like. Your jump distance is doubled for the turn, so I guess don't dump strength is the answer to that one. It'd be nice if it sort of was like, and you can substitute your dexterity for strength. I think that would be probably better benefit for that. But fifth edition is what it is in terms of ability scores and what players are considered dump stats and the like. And unfortunately for monk, strength is probably a dump stat. So eventually you get to run up walls and across liquid surfaces, I think, with Step of the Wind, or maybe just you can without having to spend a key point. All right, unarmored movement. Again, this is the monk as mobile striker, skirmisher. To me, the monk excels when the slower moving, heavier armored characters kind of like pin down the big brutes of the enemy, and the monk darts in to eviscerate and smash the soft underbelly of the enemy's casters and archers and things like that. Moving around the battlefield, being a slippery opponent, hard to lock down, is a key concept for the monk for me. And having as much speed as you can get is certainly a benefit. Although there is a diminishing returns element to it, because eventually, if you're playing with a battle map on a physical table, those things are only so big. You only need so much movement before you're like, where else am I going to go on the map this turn? At third level, you've got your monastic tradition. I find it interesting that at third level, it's still suggestive that your character's still in training and tied to a monastery. But there are mendicant monks that travel and the like, so it's no big deal. And who really, enforces those kind of narrative or story-based restrictions anyway? It's D&D. Come on, it's time to kill monsters. We've got deflect missiles, which is satisfying when it works. Very narrow use case, but when you can catch one, throw it back, it's just one of those moments where everybody's impressed. It's exciting. And so I really, it's one of those things where I make a point, if I have a monk in the party, especially at lower levels, to just throw more enemy archers in, just for them. In the same way that if I've got a cleric, we're going to face a little bit more undead. If there's a ranger in the party, then you'll probably run into your favorite enemy in your favorite terrain. It's just the way the game works well, I think. So when it works, it's very satisfying. Similar with slow fall. When you need it, it's great to have. But it kind of reflects that for me, like a lot of the monks' class abilities are these legacy features, like even more so than the druid. They're like, okay, this is how it was in first edition, and then in third, and like they're kind of a grab bag of stuff they can do that's loosely related thematically, but to me, like the higher level you get, the more it's sort of like, okay. But it can be hard to kind of look at all of those features and scratch your head and go, what is this? Who's this for? And to me, one of the things that the features suggest, and slow fall, deflect missiles, stunning strike, are the monk is an anti-magic appropriately enough. They're there to fight casters. They are there to fight supernatural monsters that maybe have special attacks that would be debilitating for other warrior types. They can get in quick, get out quick. They've got certain resistances and immunities and the like. If they get tossed around or thrown off something, or picked up and and dropped, then they'll be all right. They'll be better able to survive that and keep fighting than other warrior types. So that's what I take as the grab bag of features that the monk has. And then we get to 5th level, the big one, the DM's nightmare, stunning strike. And this is a doozy, right? Like a 1 key point, anytime, no limits. And the condition lasts until the end of the monk's next turn, not the target's next turn. So you can really get a beatdown going with the stunning strike. And here's my opinion on it. When I'm a player and there's a monk in the party and they use stunning strike, it's awesome. I love it. I can't just use it all the time. When I'm a DM and there's a monk in the party and they use stunning strike, I hate it. It's the worst feature ever. They should never have put this in. How would D&D let this happen? I think that means it's a satisfying ability. There's plenty of monsters that are immune to stun, have legendary resistance, really strong constitution saves. The kinds of monsters that you would not want failing a stun condition, or a roll to, to be stunned. They have means to avoid that. And so like those that don't, enemy casters, things like that, like to me it's up to me as a DM to protect those monsters if I don't want them to be stun locked. Not doesn't mean all the time or metagaming against the party all the time, but if it's appropriate, then you got to chew through some minions first. You got to like wait for your opportunity to strike. And if they know that the enemy knows that there's someone in the party that is capable of paralyzing them momentarily, of shutting down their key, interrupting the flow of it, Xena style, then, I think that, they ought to take precautions against that. Like, well, I'm going to fly or be invisible or intangible or surrounded by mooks. So to me, those are the ways that you kind of handle stunning strike because what are they getting? What else are they getting? They're not tossing around fireballs all the time. They're not doing anything else that's OP. This is their shtick. And it's working as intended, in my opinion, even if it sucks. even if you really loved that enemy wizard that you were gonna just wreck the party with, maybe next time, maybe next time, maybe put them in a force cage so the monk can't get to them, and then they can fire their spells out of it or something. Key empowered strikes. Your unarmed strikes count as magical for the purposes of overcoming resistance and immunity to non-magical attacks and damage. To me, this ought to be a feature of every warrior. This is what I mean when I think that magical martial arts ought to be core and central to D&D, in that past like 4th level or so, what fighter or barbarian or ranger or whoever wouldn't want this to be the case? And I think it's a good way to highlight for any warrior type the strength of their combat prowess, by letting their attacks overcome resistances, regardless of what the actual weapon that they're using is. Excuse me. There we go. It's very dry today because of all the cold. All right. So we're getting in kind of the territory of eclectic grab bag abilities for the monk. We have evasion, 3rd edition's favorite class feature to throw around. A little late in the class progression compared to that edition, but 7th level it's nice to just not have to worry about fireballs. Every near TPK I've been a part of in 5th edition, all the times when as a player I was like, oh wow, this is about to happen, have involved fireball. They just have. It's, even if you pass the save, you're going to take some damage, and you toss enough of them at the party, and they will go down. So this is one of those features of the monk that I think is really strong, and love to get it at 7th level. Would have been wonderful at 2nd, but that's okay. We don't need to be greedy. Stillness of mind. You can use an action to end one instance of charmed or frightened. Very powerful feature, especially later on as monks get proficiency in all of their saves. It's going to be hard to lock down a monk using, magical tricks and the like. And I think that's appropriate and what makes them good mage killers. Purity of body, immunity to disease and poison may never come up. But the fiction of it, the story behind it, I think is very interesting. And just if it does, on the off chance this is the one time in the campaign that disease becomes an issue, it's nice to have, because most of the diseases and the like in D&D are quite debilitating, and the poisons as well. You don't want that extra damage or whatever riders that come with the poisoned condition for it. Tongue of the Sun and the Moon, 13th level, is a head scratcher, because monks don't have the charisma or the like to make use of this too much. It's not like they're making a lot of persuasion checks or anything, but I suppose it's nice that somebody in the party will be able to talk to anything else that, can understand a language. One of my, personal things I like about D&D is imagining it as, that language is much more widespread and is almost a supernatural ability in and of itself, in that animals and plants and other things have a language. It's one of the things that makes D&D fantastic, is what makes it a magical place, is that you can walk up to a tree and have a conversation with it. You can hold court with the woodland creatures. And while not everybody wants to spend a lot of table time on that, when you need it, it's nice to have. And as I'm lying asleep at night, trying to go to drift off to the dreamland, it brings me comfort to know that any given game of Dungeons and Dragons could easily descend into a Snow White-esque fairy tale of woodland creatures having a conversation with the adventuring party. There we go. Diamond Soul. Now we're talking proficiency in all saving throws. Excellent. You can also re-roll a failed save by spending a key point, which is very cool. Timeless Body. I've never seen come up in a campaign at all, ever. Most D&D campaigns barely last a year of in-game time. So this feature is like, okay, that's great. As far as I can tell, there are no rules for aging or penalties for aging or anything like that in 5e. There used to be. You might try to finagle, getting, making a wizard that's like 50 plus in 2nd edition, so you can get a bonus to your intelligence. But as far as I can tell, you can continue adventuring until the day you die of old age, and it's no problem. Just like you can continue fighting until you hit 0 hit points, and it's no problem. It's just sort of the way the game plays. It's kind of cool. I just the story behind it is really cool, even if it never comes up. And then Empty Body. But to me, Empty Body is a strong feature. 1 minute of invisibility. Do whatever you want. You're still invisible. You get resistance to all damage, but force steering that. And if you want, you can double the price of activating it to astrally project yourself into a spell jamming ship that you just like show up on some pirate's vessel. And it's like, hey, I'm going to hang out here for a while we're on our way to the outer planes. This is a feature, right? Like, this is something that I look at and I go, man, I want my fighters to have something like this. Like, it's on par with the with some of the paladin capstone features, which is like, you activate this ability and have it for a short amount of time, and it gives you some kind of resistance or gives you something else. Like, it's just cool. It's strong. It's a good feature for 18th level. If anything, it's just I'd like to be able to play a monk and know that I was going to get this, because I think it's a really, really great feature to get late in the class progression, and is a solid like tier 4 class feature. And then Perfect Self is, okay. Compared to Empty Body, like, all right, okay, it's nice to have those points if I don't have any and haven't had a chance to have a short rest to get my 20 key points back. But I think I saw a question from someone of like, shouldn't this come earlier? And I think I agree. I think this is like a late tier 2 kind of ability. That this is one of those that you really ought to have some means of like, I've always got some points available if I need them, even if it's not 4. It was just like 2, or it scales with proficiency or something. But I capstone abilities, level 20 abilities for taking, all 20 levels in the single class are one of those things that I'm glad I'm not on the design hook for. Because I think it is difficult to design a feature that's like, okay, this is going to be satisfying when I get it, but I'm probably only going to be able to use it a handful of times, once or twice maybe, before the campaign ends. So how good does it need to be? At the same time, if it's lame, then why don't I just dip into another class for a couple of levels and be satisfied with a really cool level 18 feature? So I do not envy the D&D designers for that challenge. I could totally see why they went with give them a epic feat. Too bad the epic boons are not as strong as they could be, but I certainly see where they're coming from. So that's the base class. That's the monk. To me, it is like the bard, one of the better expressions of this class across any of the editions that I've played in. When I compare my experiences with people playing bards in 5e versus in prior editions, I see a lot less disappointments, a lot less, what do I do with this character? Or, looking on at the more durable warriors in the party with a little envy. I think, from my own vicarious experience of watching other players play it and the limited experience I have in playing the class, it's very satisfying to play. It feels good. It captures that core concept of a magical martial artist. And then the subclasses are just gravy. There's a lot about them that adds complexity to the monk, who's already a complex class. Lots of flavor. Some of them are underwhelming in their execution, but there's plenty of subclasses available for the monk that you've got a lot of variety. Quick rundown for them. We've got Way of Mercy, very strong class, but super easy to blow through all your key points with it. For some reason, it's got a plague doctor theme. There's a mask going on with it. Not sure about all that, but the idea of someone who's like taking the story that they're reinforcing with key is a magical force that is in all living creatures, and the monk knows how to manipulate it. And that's the Way of Mercy. They can harm their enemies, heal their allies, and then be begging for a short rest after every fight. The Way of Shadow is a really cool magical ninja class, but to me it lacks a few key features that I would want to see in a class like that to really make the ability to teleport between areas of shadow and darkness and the like, to strike from hidden positions. Like, give me a little damage boost whenever I do that. Give me a little something. Give me a reason not to want to dip into rogue. Which, despite the overlap, the synergy between the two classes, I'm reluctant to multi-class into rogue as a monk because of my bonus action, mainly. But something that like, okay, whenever you teleport or whenever you strike from darkness, you get this damage boost. Or just let me see in my own magical darkness would be another thing that I would think to see from this class, but we don't. Next, we have the Ascendant Dragon, which just is really cool as it reads, but I suspect the damage is a little low on some of its abilities, and they use charisma a little bit too much for my liking. But the idea of it, the execution of it, I think is solid enough that you have a lot of fun with this class, and you'd really be able to show off your mobility by being able to place your area of effect breath weapons at just the right spot for maximum effect. Similarly with the Way of the Astral Self, like the idea of it, the story behind it is awesome. I love it. I really do. I really like the idea that you've perfected this connection with your subtle body, your esoteric self, and are able to manifest it in the material plane to to combat your enemies. Is really cool as a story thing. It's a simple subclass to play, and it lets you lean heavily on wisdom if you want to just sink most of your points into one stat. Still need Dex for AC, but 10 minutes is a satisfying amount of time for a combat feature like that, and that it just builds on itself and reinforces itself to create a tight gameplay loop. I think it's really well executed. Drunken Master. I'm playing in a game or running a game right now where one of the players plays a drunken master, and the idea of just sort of swaying through combat, of being able to redirect attacks, or wanting to be surrounded by a lot of enemies so that you can lay waste to them, I find is a satisfying concept for a subclass. It seems to play very well. It doesn't add much to the monk experience. It's mostly taking what the monk already does, making it better, and giving you a little benefit to the side. And then there's Way of the Four Elements. Without the Tasha's optional features, which let you make a bonus action attack whenever you spend a key point, this subclass really suffers. In my opinion, all of the spells cost too much key. They just do. And there's not enough of them. And ultimately, when I think of this class, I don't want to just cast elemental spells. I want elemental style attacks that might look like spells. Maybe one or two of them are, but the majority of them are just spells you can cast. And I find that deeply unsatisfying, and really wanted something else, because this is a no-brainer for a monk concept, but it just not well executed, and much like Way of the Shadow, really feels like a first draft in a way that many of the subclasses in the player's handbook do. But that's probably to be expected given how long 5th edition's been around and its trajectory of development. Then Kensai is another classic monk concept that I find is fairly well executed, if a little finicky. That it's incentivizing you to make non-weapon attacks with your actions, so that you can get the benefit of your AC bonus. I find I don't know if that's intended, but it's certainly the way the rules are written, and so it's got a little contradiction there that keeps it from being like, oh yeah, I love this class, this subclass, but as the only dedicated weapon master in 5e, it has a special place in my heart. I really like the idea of a Kensai. One of the monks I would like to play would be a fighter Kensai. Just hadn't had a chance yet. Then Way of the Long Death, I think at first glance might appear underwhelming. To me, it has certain action economy issues. There's a lot of you got to use your whole action to inflict fear on a group of enemies. Okay, I mean, if I'm using Tasha's, then that's all right, because then I can make a bonus action attack at least. But how durable they are. The temporary hit points they gain, the fact that as long as they have key, they can stay alive, difficult to put down, I think is satisfying. The only thing I really would like to see from them is a honest to goodness, I hit you, touch you, whatever, no hit point damage, you're dropped to 0. I would love to see something like that for this one, because we get it with Way of the Open Hand, which completes our classic monk suite of abilities. To me, they're the strongest of the player's handbook subclass options, and when I've seen them in play, I'm always impressed by their ability to put a beat down on the enemy. And Quivering Balm is just a fun and interesting class feature, even though it's a little wonky, a little weird. I think it's it's very interesting. I like the story behind it, even if it's you're not always getting to that level and getting to use it. And then Way of the Sun Soul Monk is to me needs a complete rewrite. difficult to see why I would recommend this to anyone. It just seems like a poorly executed class, but an interesting concept, right? As an aside, the treatment of monks in the Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide is kind of interesting because at the very least, like there are nods towards these monastic traditions being religious institutions. They're devoted to various gods or aspects to gods. You would join one of those monasteries because you wanted to devote yourself spiritually to that particular deity or divine presence. And so I think it's interesting to go back to one of fifth edition's first supplements and sort of refresh and see what it is that they had to say about how these classes work in D&D's flagship setting. That's the monk, right? Depending on how you play them, what options you choose, the feats you supplement, whether you multi-class or not, there's a lot you can do with the monk. I think that they are a strong addition to the game. If anything, I'd like to see more classes or subclass options for other classes, make reference to key, make use of it as a mechanic so that it doesn't feel like siloed into this one class that's coded as, East Asian, Shaolin monk, like, well, come on, like surely the armor wearing knight wants to develop their inner energy. They want to devote themselves to their martial practice and get good. Perhaps the sorcerers are doing something with it as they hone their own innate magical abilities. So I think it's there's plenty to go around. More classes can get in on this idea that D&D introduces, and the fact that the monk is here, I think is it makes for a more satisfying gameplay. I would not want to see a version of D&D without them. So yeah, that's where I'm at. We'll take some questions, see where your guys are at with the monk. Here we go. Okay, so CH has a question. In certain video games, like Divinity Original Sin 2, weapon types have unique special attacks. Do you think adding a unique attack to each weapon would make martial characters stack better against full casters? I do. And Kobold Press has a supplement called Beyond Damage Dice that does just this. Every weapon has 2 special modes that if you're proficient in that weapon, you can use those. They're not each unique, right? So, like spears and halberds share some special attacks, but there are things like, all right, I'm going to take my javelin, and when I throw it at this person, I can pin a part of their clothing or armor or something to whatever's behind them, a tree, a wall, or whatever. Like, or I'm using, like a dagger or something that I can maybe disarm or trap another weapon as I'm, when I defend myself. An axe can destroy armor, things like that. I really hope that there is something like this in One D&D. There seems to be hints of it when you were sort of like looking at the preview videos and the like. They want to do something with weapons for the warrior group. And when I think of the warrior group, right, fighter, monk, barbarian, I am struggling to come up with a class mechanic that would unify all 3 of those, like, say, channel divinity for the priest group. Easy to see how wild shape's going to be a channel divinity, or potentially, right? Or expertise for the expert group. And so having something to do with weapons, something that when the warrior in the party picks up a weapon, it's different than when the other classes pick it up. They're able to use it more effectively, able to determine which one's the best one to use for a situation. What I don't want is for players to feel like they have to stick with one weapon. One of my biggest pet peeves across every edition of D&D is pigeonholing weapon users into using one weapon. When I play warriors, I make a point to bring multiple weapons and find an excuse to use every one of them as I can, as sort of like metagame goals for myself. One of my most satisfying experiences with a barbarian was like every session I play, I'm using a different weapon, and we'll find a narrative excuse to have it. Like, I'm not just going to like, oh, I'm using this one today, like pulling them from my golf bag, but like, oh no, he left the battle axe at home, so I just have the dagger this today. And chewing through a corridor of mooks with a dagger wielding barbarian is a very, very satisfying gameplay experience. And I want that for every warrior. I want that for the monks, I want that for the fighters, and the warrior adjacents, the types, the paladins, the rangers, etc. Let's give us a reason to use different weapons. One way I can think, I think I would do this is to D&D used to differentiate weapon damage based on the size of the creature you were attacking. So some weapons were better against larger creatures than others. I think this could be another way to do that. You want to bring a great axe or a halberd or something to a fight with a giant, not a rapier or a dagger or a whip. You want something that can heft and hew and chop. This would be a good way to do it. Monks would benefit from these features, just as much as fighters or others. They're weapon users. Monks are. lots of martial arts with weapons over here. All right, let's see. So CH got another question here with, what do you think of a bonus action key recovery die like the fighter's second wind? I could see something like that. Just a quick, I need a little couple points to get me through the end of the combat. Maybe coming in at a later level than second wind. For me, that outside of the first, 4 or 5 levels, you really have plenty of key points for a fight, as long as you're just not blowing through them all when it's your first few rounds. And I think the higher level you get, getting more of them. So if we had something that's like a key recovery on a bonus action or in combat recovery, I wouldn't want it to be, a lot. I would want it to be more like, perfect self ends up being, where you didn't have any, or you've run out. Here's a little bit to get you through to the next short rest. So I can see that being like an optional class feature, similar to the other optional class features introduced in Tasha's. But yeah, I don't think it's needed. I'm not, I'm not over here going, man, they really ought to have that. It's sticking out like a sore thumb. But I do think that having it would be, be nice. I'd certainly, use it all the time. Let's see. So Tyler's asking, is Stunning Strike OP or nicely balanced? I played a Battle Master Monk and had a blast running around into the fray just to bop each enemy. Yeah, I bet. To me, it's like I said, kind of going over it earlier. I think it's working fine. I don't think it's OP. You can stun lock one enemy. Eventually, one of them, an enemy will pass a save. And I think that it's if a DM finds that their monsters are just getting, wrecked by the bunk in the party as they stun everyone, because they're just like, everybody gets a stun, then how often is that happening? And if it's happening every time, then maybe it's time to vary up the fights, the tactics the enemies are using, just the conditions of combat. There's other ways to address it without digging into the mechanics, I think. And that's how I would, if I felt it needed to be rebalanced. But like I said, I hate it whenever I'm the DM, which means it must be doing something right, because it's players certainly seem to love it. Levy asks, do you think there is a design space for monks as a secret society subclass, like Freemasons with their monastery and pocket plane that you need an item to reach, connect their tool proficiency in class? I like that idea. I like the idea of the monk is like, yeah, we have to operate in secret, in the open, so we can't go about armed and armored. We have to look like everybody else. Nothing that would readily identify us to the agents of the monarchy that are that are coming after us. And you can kind of look at it as, the monks are in their monastery trying to perfect something about themselves, right? They're there to reach some sort of state of enlightenment or perfection or just development that is irrespective of anyone other than them. And you can see how that would be misinterpreted by various institutions in your setting as look at these selfish jerks secluding themselves from the rest of us. We got to stop that. We got to cut that out, or it could be that, that they're doing this to connect with some sort of divine presence or cosmic power that, the society at large sees as inimical or detrimental. And so the monks have to seclude themselves. and then, its secret signs and codes and the like that, how they move about and communicate with each other. So I think there's a interesting, at least, design space in the sense of when you're designing your world, your setting, and the like. Mechanics, I don't know that I would change much for it. It's really about how you interpret what's already there and how you make a place for the class in your game world, which I think you ought to give consideration to for all of them, but especially the ones that the players choose to play at that moment. Let's see. Zenja asks, uh, what would you say to DMs who think that monks don't fit my setting? I would say they need to expand their imagination and accept that there's more to a fantasy game than what they're thinking of. Like if it's an aesthetic thing of like, well, this is a kung fu monk over here in my Arthurian fantasy, then I don't know, let's reskin, reimagine. The D&D world is huge, like our own. The things that seem incongruous can, sit side by side with each other, and it makes sense because those kinds of things happen in our own world. I think sometimes when it comes to creating fantasy settings and the like, we start thinking too rationally, too much of like, well, this has to be a coherent story that makes sense or whatever. It's just like, okay, if you want, our own world doesn't work like that, and you can treat your fantasy world in a similar vein, and it's much more freeing, much more inclusive in the sense of like whatever concept the players can think of and imagine, there's a way to include it. Maybe they're from somewhere distant, maybe they're from a different time or a different dimension. I would encourage those DMs to number one, acknowledge, yep, not the monk as it's presented doesn't fit the setting. What monk would? What would it look like for the monk? The mechanics of it. What kind of narrative dressing does it need to fit your setting, and to think and to pursue that route, as opposed to the no, not for me. And I am speaking to my past self in this sense, because I was that DM for a long time, where I was like, well, it just doesn't fit. What's this kung fu guy doing over here in my Knights and Wizards game? And it's because it's cool. That's why. It's because one day a player watched a kung fu and was like, I want to play that character in my D&D game. And the dungeon master was like, all right, let's do it. And now we have it as a class in D&D. And I want to honor that spirit of the game. And so I am speaking to myself when I'm answering this question. That's the conclusion I reached, which was many ways to think of the monk, many ways to fit them in the setting. And they can always just toss it to the player. You want to play this class? Tell me how they fit into the world. That's a good way to get the player invested, do a little world building for them, things like that. All right. We're going to answer a couple more. All right. There are a lot of good ones, but all right. Daniel's asking, many classes have some way of disabling their main ability. That is, cleric's angers a god, paladin breaks their oath, wizard spellbook destroyed, etc. How would you go about disabling a monk, taking away their core features? I think if you really leaned into the magical aspect of it, that their aesthetic way of life, the denial of worldly pleasures, possessions, connections, and attachments and the like, is the fuel, is what empowers them to tap into this inner resource. And that the monk has to abide by certain lifestyle restrictions, we'll say. What they eat, what they do with their time, how they live their day. Are they not following the rule and order of their monastic tradition? And this could be something that, plays into the background of it as the PC prepares prepares themselves to go off adventuring, the NPC mentors and trainers and secret masters and the like of the monastery that they're leaving, giving them guidebooks, giving them a means to continue this lifestyle that otherwise requires its practitioners to seclude themselves from the rest of the world. But for whatever reason, this monk is going out into the world and has to take their monastery with them. Has to live that life in the midst of all of this worldly chaos. Would be how I would hook that, and then it's sort of like, does the cleric anger the god? That's a role playing thing, right? It'd be similar with the monk. Are you abiding by the strictures of your class or your order? And to me, this would be something that, only if it's really enjoyable from a player perspective, or it's something that they're really wanting to, to explore or to have, at risk. I think that these kind of gotchas of like, oh, you angered the gods, no more spells for you. I think there's some games where that's, fun, appropriate, it works. But fifth edition and sort of the mindset of it, the sort of ethos that it's going for, I think it's a bit at odds with. But I do like the idea of it, that in order to get all these magical powers, to unlock this energy, to master it, not just in yourself, but in others, requires you to do something. I feel that way about wizards as well. I think, there's a reason wizards are weird. There's a reason that wizards smell bad or live by themselves. And it's because they've got to do a lot of bizarre things to make their minds a home for magic. They weren't born that way. They didn't get it from a cosmic power. They had to do it all themselves. And in that sense, wizards and monks share a lot of the same conceptual space with that. And then, so we go with, from Gwendolyn. As DMs, how do we reinforce the society fantasy of a monk using NPC interactions? That's a good question. In our world, a lot of monks are, in service to the communities that are nearby. They take up alms for them. They assist them. In medieval Europe, a lot of monasteries are brewing beer, and making kind of a tidy profit off of it. They're providing a refuge for members of the community who might want to become monks temporarily for their own, for whatever reason, or who might need some sort of sanctuary or refuge. So I would ask those DMs to consider, like, all right, first off, the only monastery you need to worry about is the one your player monk came from, period. Anything else is, when you got the time and it's not going to interfere with your game, go for it. But for the PC's monastery, how did they relate to the community around them? Were they like smack dab in the middle of town, walls secluding them from everything, but interacting with those townspeople and urban dwellers daily? Or are they like really secluded, really out there? But the surrounding villages of the mountain valleys that the monastery sits amidst of know that they can come to that place if they need help, if they need assistance. So one of the monasteries that I created for one of my games was a monastery for Way of the Long Death, and they lived in the city. The monks were mendicants, so they stayed most of the time in their monastery, but they also traveled throughout the city. They performed funerary services. They tended to the bodies of the dead, burials. They organized mourners and funeral processions, things like that. And they also tended to graves that had been forgotten, who people's, the families or the like of those interred had passed away, moved on, something like that. You don't want those bodies coming back as angry ghosts or, ghouls or something like that. So the monks of the Long Death are there to tend those places. They're sacred, they're holy. And it's their job as lay members of this religious order to keep those things up, to say prayers for the dead, to help those who are suffering and the like. This is before Way of Mercy, but I would have included Way of Mercy in that monastery as well. So to me, the interactions are there, are there to reflect the background of the game world, how the monastery interacts with the setting and the like. And then the player gets to determine, well, I'm not that kind of monk. Like, wait a minute, we do what? we haven't helped you? Well, now there's maybe a bit of a crisis. You've got an opportunity to highlight a bit of non-combat tension with the character. Or they get to see how the other members of their order are received in the wider world, and then make note of it and not pay attention at all, just because that's how they choose to play the game. But that's how I would approach that. Excellent question. All right. There's a lot of good ones here. I know I'm going to have to to get to the rest of them at some point. Monk is one of those classes that raises a lot of interesting, thoughts and the like, just simply because of the mechanical complexity of it, but also because of the potential for how these classes fit into the world, the institutions they're a part of, and the like, rich world building potential, and the like. So appreciate the questions. We'll definitely hang on to them and let you know whenever we do another big Q&A. Until then, we're coming up for the holidays. We're not going to be doing every week. I don't have the dates in front of me because I was not thinking that far ahead. But I know the next couple of weeks we are taking off. In early January, we'll be back a bit, but then be another week or so there where we're off. So keep an eye on social media of when we're going to be back with these Thursday live streams. And until next time, hope you have a great time of it. Hope you have good games and that your holidays are merry. See you next time.